Lingua Brutalica is a podcast that uses ethnographic interviews to study language use in the extreme metal community. We are studying a music scene known for its love of themes and topics generally considered offensive, and it is likely that some episodes will touch on topics or opinions some listeners may find tasteless or ethically problematic. Ethnographic researchers aim to adopt the interviewee's point of view so that we can draw out and study the attitudes, beliefs, and practices that are important to them. We want to make it clear that in presenting these conversations here, we do not endorse any of their content. Our aim is to explore the thought processes behind language use in this long-running, international, and yet understudied scene. Welcome back to Lingua Brutalica with me, Jess Crook, and my co-host, Wes Robertson.
Hello.
Today we're recording what we might call a second pair part to our previous episode with Nechochwen by speaking with Austin Lunn of Panopticon. For any listeners who might not know, we're especially inspired to record this episode to pay homage to their split LP released in 2020 and to investigate two takes on folk and black metal music that we perhaps haven't heard before. So to get us started with Panopticon's perspective, we wanted to ask Austin to first introduce Panopticon's music to listeners who may not have heard it yet. Would you mind, Austin?
Sure. So when Panopticon first started in 2007, I had been playing in like some kind of Black and Death type bands and had been playing in a bunch of like crusty punk, like D-beat type stuff and things like that. And I was always, I was a huge black metal fan, but I obviously didn't want to do it the way that it's done in Europe because I'm not European. It inspires me and I find it fascinating. So I would kind of borrow some of that from time to time, but I wanted to mix my own perspective into it, my own instrumentation, my own interests, the things that I like. And I like, American folk, Americana music. I like, atmospheric music, kind of shoegazy stuff and mid-90s emo and bands like Sunny Day Real Estate and stuff like that. And then I also like the most extreme black metal, death metal and crust and grind and things like that. My interest in music is very, very wide. And so I just kind of wanted a place where I could blend all those things together unapologetically. And that's how it started. And it started when I was 23 and I am 39 now. So it's been quite a long time at this point. So lots of changes as I've changed as a person, obviously.
Your band's broadly been described as folk metal at times, like Encyclopedia Metallum calls it atmospheric black/folk metal. Is that a description that you align with, or are you not a fan of that term?
I think that that's a completely fair assessment, because it's not black metal per se. Like, it doesn't sound like, Streed or, In the Night Side Eclipse era Emperor or, stuff, but it does sound like Ulver, like their album Bergtat. Sounds a lot like that. Or it sounds like Vindir, like their album Arntor. There's a lot of that kind of feeling, this kind of folky sound, but instead of just being like, hey, let's pretend to be Vikings, I was like, here's the music that I grew up with and the music that reminds me of home, which is this kind of Americana, folky, tradition, some traditional music. So I felt like it was totally fair to say folk metal. But then again, when people hear folk metal, they think like, dancing pirates and people with troll costumes and stuff, and that's not me at all. Like, that's so I get the confusion there, but I don't know what else to call it. So atmospheric folk metal works.
I mean, folk is a kind of a vague term because what folk means is literally different depending on where you're standing.
Right.
Yeah. Not as many pirates in the States.
No, not at all.
So you said you also draw on traditional music. When you say traditional, what do you mean by that?
Traditional Appalachian music, early Americana.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of the music that came over with Scotch Irish settlers in the South. So a lot of that kind of stuff. I mean, a lot of that's present on Kentucky with the Sarah Ogan Gunning songs and you know, that kind of thing. Those more traditional mining songs, and then a lot of my folk songs, like even like the Devil Walk the Woods, is meant to sound like early Appalachian music.
Right. That's really interesting because before the interview, we were talking a little bit about, you know, your history getting into like the punk scene first when you were a lot younger. I was wondering, yeah, could you kind of tell us like what the story is, like how these different like scenes and genres are connected in your experience? So, you know, punk, metal, and folk and traditional Americana music.
The folk and Americana and country music was always around where I grew up. It's just everywhere. And blues, actually, because I lived in Memphis when I was little. And I went back and forth between Memphis and Nashville quite often until I was, you know, starting to become a teenager, like a preteen. So there was just always around. It was something that I saw a lot. It was something that I listened to a lot. Usually not, and when I was young, it was not voluntarily. It was just what it was, you know. But then as I got older, it became sentimental to me, you know. I mean, it was when my grandmother died, you know, the first thing that I wanted was her Patsy Cline LP, you know. You know, that kind of thing. These are the kind of things that as you get older, they become very synonymous with like who you are as a person. When I was a 11, 12, that kind of age. I mean, well, actually, shit, before that, I guess I was maybe 8 or 9 when I got my first King's X record. My dad bought it for me. And it was 1990. It was their album Faith, Hope, Love. And it was like the first time I'd ever heard progressive rock and progressive metal. And, you know, that kind of progressive, heavier music kind of blew my mind. And from there, I got into more and more progressive rock, you know, bands like Rush and Dream Theater and that kind of stuff. You know, there was a litany of bands that were in that genre, especially bands that came out of Houston. I was really into all the bands that were in the kind of King's X scene. And they all have this specific sound of like 12-string bass and harmonized vocals and atypical rhythms and song structure. And that really made a huge impression on me. And so, you know, here I was like 11, 12 years old, listening to all this really complex music. And that's how I learned how to play drums, was by playing drums to those albums. You know, like starting off as a little boy with pots and pans on the bed and banging on them, and then working my way up to playing an actual drum set. And so the music that I cut my teeth on as a musician was this progressive stuff. Well, the natural backlash to that, when you've been immersed in it so much, is the first time that I heard Minor Threat or Dead Kennedys or Black Flag, I was like, holy shit, what is this? And it blew my mind, this like raw aggression and anger, you know. And like, obviously, you know, I had heard lots of metal up until that point. You know, everybody liked Metallica and Sepultura and all those bands back then. A lot of those bands my parents wouldn't let me have because it had swearing in it, you know. Yeah. And you got to keep in mind, this is the South, Memphis, Tennessee. So, you know, my parents were church folk, and so was I when I was little. But as I became a teenager and I got into punk, you know, I kind of went back to metal and started alongside listening to punk, listening to classic thrash. And then that kind of led to grindcore and led to crust bands and the Memphis crust scene, bands like His Hero Was Gone and all that stuff. So I started going to shows in like 1999, and, you know, I was in high school. And so, you know, I played in bands, really bad ones, you know, with my friends and stuff. None of them ever recorded until I was about 16 or 17. I started like being in bands like D-beat bands and, you know, punk and hardcore type stuff. And during that time period, it just kind of led me right back to metal again. And, you know, along the way, I would need a break from metal. So I would listen to like Godspeed You Black Emperor and stuff like that, and Mono, and, you know, and then I would get back into acoustic stuff and folk because it reminded me of my family, listening to Johnny Cash and all that. And so it all was just kind of this swirling pot of influences that I was always just kind of grabbing here and there and mixing it in. So that's kind of how it happened.
When did black metal kind of join that equation?
Suicide Nation. Before I heard Suicide Nation, I always thought that black metal was this kind of goofy thing because, you know, in the late 90s and early 2000s in rural Tennessee, just outside of Memphis, you know, there wasn't really a lot of black metal. I mean, we had Epic of Unlight, but, you know, you had to be old enough to drive down into Memphis to go to the shows. You know, my parents moved out to the suburbs when I was in 4th grade. And so I was out there. And so I didn't really, you know, I wasn't really part of any of that stuff until I got older. And I remember hearing, you know, bands like Cradle of Filth and Dimmu Borgir and like all that kind of stuff. And I thought it was, I didn't think it was for me. It was I thought that it was like the kind of, you know, the kids that wore like pantyhose on their arms and stuff. And like the big, huge baggy jeans and stuff.
Very familiar.
I thought that was the kind of, I thought that was the music that those kids listened to. And I didn't really identify with them, you know, because I was skateboarding and mountain biking and listening to, you know, punk records and stuff. So I just kind of was like, yeah, this isn't my thing. And then all of a sudden I found Suicide Nation. And it was this like black metal sound, but with this personal anger and intense feeling. And I was like, oh shit, this is black metal, you know, but black metal made by dudes like me. And so then all of a sudden I was like, well, I want to hear more of this sound. And so in 2000, I started just digging into 2000, 2001, around that time, I just started digging into bands. And one of the first proper black metal records I ever bought, I think the first I ever bought, was in the Nightside Eclipse. And it blew my mind. It was the most magical thing. I remember like driving on a highway, listening to it. Like I dubbed a tape of the CD. And I was just listening to it in my car and driving late at night. And I remember just not even paying attention to where I was driving anymore. I missed my exit. You know, I ended up like not even knowing where the hell I was because I got so lost in this record. And that was when I was like, I get this. I totally understand this music now. You know, and ever since then, it's just been this thing. I mean, I still love everything. I love death metal, huge into it. But black metal just has this magic to it that is hard to explain.
When you were getting absorbed by it at the time and just in metal in general, was it all the music or did you pay any attention to the lyrics of those albums at all?
You know, strangely enough, as important as lyric writing is to me, I have an ability to kind of shut that off. If I don't like the lyrics to a band, if I think that their subject matter is corny or I just think that the lyrics are poorly written, I can just kind of ignore it. Because my primary focus has always been on music. It's easy for me to do that. And especially with black metal, because unfortunately a lot of the time the lyrics are kind of, you know, not about things that I'm into. Like I'm obviously not about Satan. You know, I'm a middle-aged dad, and you know, I'm like a cozy family guy. That's you know what I mean. So I'm not gonna be like, you know, hail Satan and shit. You know, that's just doesn't appeal to me at all. But then, you know, on the other hand, there is Americana and country songs that literally make me cry because I resonate with the lyrics and I understand the poetry so deeply. And there are bands that do that for me. But they're not like the classic, you know, the classic black metal bands, like the 90s Norwegian bands. So a lot of those bands lyrically, I don't really resonate with them. Some of it is really well written, you know, and I'm like, wow, that's really beautiful, but it just doesn't really, you know, I'm not from that country. I'm not from that community. And I'm also not of the mindset of us and shit, you know?
So like, if you I suppose, aren't really necessarily very connected to lyrics of other bands, like when you're consuming music, do you ever experience, I suppose, having a band's music ruined by lyrics then, or is that just not happen if you can kind of turn off and ignore the lyrical content?
It depends on the band, and it depends on how bad it is. Like, there are some bands that I just can't handle listening to, bands that are, racist, like obscenely racist. If I get wind of that, I just kind of gotta tap out, and I'm just like, I can't fill my brain with that stuff. I have zero tolerance for misogynistic lyrics that are anti-woman or advocate violence against women. Like a lot of the death metal bands that get into that. There's a couple of bands that I listen to that have some gore themes and stuff, like, obviously Death is one of my favorite all-time bands, and the early Death has some pretty unsavory lyrics, but you have to take that in context of Chuck Schuldiner being like a 16-year-old.
Sure.
And if the lyrics I wrote when I was a 16-year-old were out in the public, I would never show it. Because they were horrible. They were just dumb as a bag of doorknob. So like, I get that, I see the subtlety in that and the nuance of it. But there are limitations. I just can't do it. Once it starts marginalizing or singling out different groups and advocating violence against them, I just don't want that populating my brain. So I'm just like, nah. Like, I know David Allan Coe is supposedly a great songwriter. There's a lot of stuff that he said on some of his records that I've been shown, and I don't listen to him because I just can't. I don't care if he's a great singer. It's just like, I can't do it. So It's one of those things,
Are there inverse cases where accessing the lyrics has actually made you like a song even more?
Absolutely. Multiple occasions where like I haven't really liked a musician, but their lyrical content has blown my mind. Like I love, for example, I love Jason Isbell, but I'm not crazy about his voice. It's just not my interest, but I think his songwriting is phenomenal. And I think his lyrical devices are incredible. They're very vulnerable and very personal, but they're very well crafted. And so I love that about him, even though I'm not really crazy about his voice. It's just, he's a great singer, but it's just not my style. So there's been a lot of cases like that, especially in folk. But in metal, it's one of those things where it's like, because of the grim vocals and the death growls and stuff, it's kind of easy to just tune that out. But if the lyrics are cool, it's also not as evident because they're being screamed at you.
So how did you then kind of come about deciding your own lyrical style? Because you have obviously, the black metal influence, metal influence, but also the folk influence. And, like until your band, at least in my familiarity, there aren't really a lot of groups taking that kind of, in the American context, imported black metal style and mixing it with the local, Appalachian folk metal. There's a lot of different ways you could have taken that. How did you actually kind of figure out a direction when you first started sitting down and writing your own lyrics for your own music?
Well, this is going to be a bit of an anticlimactic message, or
all right,
an anticlimactic answer. So I apologize in advance. A lot of my lyrics are first pass.
Okay.
And so, I don't really, sometimes I don't really think about what I'm writing. I'm more writing from an emotional perspective. So music is very much a purge to me. And lyrical content is often a purge to me. A lot of the time I write my lyrics and there's not even music attached to it. It's just a journal that I carry in my bag that I write down. Like a lot of the lyrics to Kentucky, I was at the places that the songs are about. And I sat like at Bodies Under the Falls was written sitting directly under Wahoo Falls with a notebook. Like I was just sitting there writing it. I wrote Black Soot and Red Blood on Blanton State Park County. Like I was there, sitting there, riding in the woods, climbing up a friggin' mountain, and in Appalachian forests. And, Blåtimen was written in the Boundary Waters area, just outside of the Boundary Waters, in Ely, just outside of Ely, up on the Echo Trail. And I was just sitting on a rock, like a huge boulder overlooking this lake, and I wrote it all just kind of in one pass. And so that's kind of how it goes. So I'm not really thinking to myself, like, am I going to make this fit the style and the sound? It's mostly just like, how am I feeling at the moment right now? And what do I have to say? What's on my heart? What's on my mind? And then when it comes down to it, when I'm recording vocals, I'll fix things here and there so that it fits in with the song. Or I'll add a verse if I need one. But it's often hard for me to add the verse because I'm kind of faking that inspiration.
Mm.
So it sometimes feels a little inauthentic, and I get kind of about it,
Yeah.
And then with the folk stuff, the folk songs end up just being like, little notes that I write to myself, when I'm out for a run, because I started trail running over a year ago, and I've written tons of stuff when I trail run. Is I'll just like, and I'm probably going to run off a cliff one day because I'm typing on my phone, freaking running, but it's when I give my brain time to clear itself, that's usually when all the stuff pops up.
You're actually, I'm sure that this is quite a common process, but you're actually the first person we've talked to that writes lyrics without any part of a song to attach them to. And so you mentioned that you'll sometimes edit the lyrics to fit, what you need for the song. Do you ever build the song around the lyrics? Like say, okay, I have these lyrics, this song needs to fit this kind of structure?
Absolutely. I've absolutely done that. I mean, if Panopticon was a car, it would be held together with duct tape and Bondo, because it's literally just like, it's this thing that I do because I need to do it. So every way that I could do something, I have done. Like I recorded an album where I recorded all the drums first and had no riffs. I just composed drums and then went back and wrote riffs to what I thought the drums sounded like. And that album was Social Disservices.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went back and I like grabbed lyrics from these places where I had written pieces. And then I was like, this one can fit here. And I had like a riff bank that I had been for years, just kind of like stuffing riffs in this open session.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote the drums, it was an experiment, obviously. It was totally intentional. I just wanted to see what it would be like to write an album backwards. And that's, so I've totally done that before, where I've, written something and been like, oh man, I should turn this into a song. And a lot of the time that ends up being those kind of talking blues songs where it's me after smoking too many cigarettes and drinking too much beer, sounding like this, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, which since I quit smoking, I don't sound like that anymore. It was pretty bad, but yeah, I've totally done it that way, which it's fun.
Based on our conversations with metal musicians, it seems like it's more common to have the music first and then write lyrics to fit the music. But in my conversations with other musicians who have written like folk and blues in the past, apparently the verse is more common. So what you were saying before about like writing lyrics and then writing the music afterwards to kind of fit with those lyrics is a more kind of folk blues approach. I was wondering if that was conscious for you, if you were trying to actually like reproduce that kind of folk blues approach rather than the more traditional like metal approach, if you like, where you have the music and then write the lyrics to fit.
I wish that I could say yes to that, but I can't. I mean, that would be awesome if I could. Yes, that fits my my intent perfect, but no, not at all. But I mean, I never really thought about it like that, because a lot of especially traditional folk music, is kind of written to convey a message, and then they apply that message to a song, and the song is usually simplistic chords. It's the same chords of every song. I mean, if you even think about Which Side Are You On and Come All You Coal Miners, those two songs are very melodically similar. Except for the Pete Seeger version of Which Side Are You On, which has this like really haunting minor resolve to it. I love it. Pete Seeger's version of that song's super good. It's super haunting. But yeah, I mean, that I wish that was the case, but it's not. It's usually just this kind of thing where just the lyrics, the idea pops up in my brain, and then I'd go, oh damn, I don't want to forget that, and then I write it down, and then the next thing I know, I'm writing more verses because it's just kind of barfing out of me. I mean, there have been times like The Wandering Ghost from Scars. I wrote that in just one, like almost like a computer printer. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a bottle of bourbon. And I just moved to Minnesota, and I was just really missing my friends and my family back in Kentucky. And I just literally just like my brain just puked that thing right out, which probably subconsciously had been swimming around in there. I mean, the same thing happened with Beast Rider. I was at the brewery working one day, and I was taking a break because I had a cycle going in the back, like a caustic cycle on a tank. And I went up to the front and I grabbed a beer and I sat down at one of the tables, and I just grabbed a piece of paper and a pen, and I just wrote Beast Rider. Like, it just came out. I was just like, oh, that never changed anything. It was just the weirdest. I mean, and what I think it is it's probably just been swimming around in my brain, and I'm such a space cadet that I didn't realize it. So but yeah, I wish that was the case, because that would be super cool. And I've never even connected those dots before you said it. But you're totally right. It is very similar process.
Maybe it's subconscious in the back of your mind somewhere, like you said, swimming around in there.
It's like, I mean, I'm a total space cadet. And so it's, that is, it's very likely that that's the case. So, but maybe from now on, I'll just bullshit people and say it is intentional. Oh shit, this is being recorded.
You can cut that part out.
We'll cut it out. Yeah.
This entire question train is gone.
We'll just cut it to yes. Yeah. That's how I do it.
Yes. Or just like, even if we can't find it, get someone else, get our editor just to say yes and put that
in. Just interject someone else's voice going, yes.
Hello, I am Austin. Yes.
Yes. But no, that's really cool. I thought that. That's really neat to think about, applying folk methods to other music, even if it's not folk,
Well, this kind of actually jumps to the question we're going to ask before we get into some of your lyrics more specifically, which is that, traditionally a lot of discussions of metal, especially kind of the gore stuff, has said that there's been like a distance, it's not meant to be taken seriously. It's like a horror movie, whatever. And that metal music lyrics therefore aren't very personal. But is that like an opinion that you've heard? And is it something, I'm guessing you'll say no, given what you've said so far, but is it something you agree with as a musician in the scene?
I obviously don't agree with that for me, but I know that a lot of people, their lyrics are not personal expression of who they are. And I don't judge anybody based on that. I mean, in a lot of bands that I really love, their lyrics are not, super personal to them. And some of the bands that I love just write about science, and I think that's great. And a lot of the bands that I like to listen to, they write about the occult and all this kind of thing. And that's whatever, that's for them. But for me, I can't, I was actually having this discussion with my brother-in-law yesterday. We went down to, we had a beer event down in Chicago. He and I run a brewery together called Hammerheart Brewing. I mean, Wes, you know about it, I know, because we talked about it but we were down there, and we have 7 hours or whatever from Minneapolis, St. Paul, where we met up to talk about this. And we were talking about all these like kind of more occult bands that deal in kind of darkness and death and Satanism and all this kind of stuff. And, and how I listen to a lot of those bands, but I also have met a lot of those people, and they're not dark, evil people. They're wonderful, really great people. Many of them are friends, good friends. And so what I got to thinking about was how, for a lot of people, music is a place to put their negative feelings and their negative emotions, but it's also a place to kind of be who they are not, and be who they wish they were, or be who they would like to be in certain situations. And for me, music has never been that. It's always been this thing where, like, I write about my thoughts, my feelings, and it very much mirrors, for better or for worse, who I am as a person, because I don't really know any other way to write except for from my own perspective. And I've tried to, like, experiment with writing, kind of things that are more like fantastic, or things that are not, reflective of who I am. And it feels like putting on a costume for me. I can't do that. And I don't blame anybody who does. I think it's great if people can exercise that part of their lives, and it gives them some sort of thrill, or makes them feel comforted, or makes them feel confident in themselves. That's great. But for me, it just doesn't work for me, so to answer your question, it's kind of like, it's kind of a non-answer, basically. It's like, to each their own, no judgment for me. I do what I do. They do what they do. It's totally up to the writer to write from their heart.
Yeah. Definitely not a non-answer. Yeah, exactly the answer.
Yeah, totally.
I know a lot of my answers here are kind of a little wishy-washy.
No, they're perfect, man.
No, it's just nuance. Yeah.
We don't want this would be a very boring podcast if every answer is just yes, no. Just like straight direct, yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, none of my answers so far have been very dramatic or inflammatory. They're just kind of like,
I'd say they've been dramatic. I don't know about inflammatory. I don't think we've had many inflammatory takes in the podcast. We've had some inflammatory discussions about whether or not you can use a thesaurus when you're writing. That's probably the biggest debate that we've had.
That's a debate.
Oh, no. Yeah. I knew some guys that used to do that. And, like, it's okay to use a thesaurus if you can't find a word that rhymes with what you want to say. And I have agonized over that shit, where I'm just like, just doesn't match what I wanted, and so then next thing I know, I'm like Google searching another word for this, and but I usually find my way one way or another.
Well, this is the perfect transition point to talk more about your lyrics, because out of all the artists we've spoken to so far, I think you're probably the one that's had the longest career to date. So while we want to focus on your current thinking about language and lyrics, we did want to begin by moving through the history of your lyricism a little bit. So starting with 2008's Self-Titled and 2009's Collapse, one feature of the lyrics on these albums that is distinct from your later releases is the direct reference to Scandinavian and or Viking folklore. So for instance, the Lay of Grimnir retells the Norse Grimnismal epic, and the song names, I'm going to butcher this, Apterganger, and yes, thank you, and Merkstave.
Merkstave.
Respectively reference Norse undead and inverted runes. So what drew you to singing about Norse mythos early on?
It's still in there throughout each record. There's like little bits here and there. Like on Roads to the North, there's lyrics in Norwegian. It's always kind of been in there. It's a personal interest, and it's a personal passion, especially like mythology or Old Norse, Scandinavian mythology, those kinds of things. Like I have an interest in that, and I've done a lot of studying, read a lot about it. I have an interest in the kind of pagan spirituality. Obviously I don't take it super seriously. It's just like it's very personal to me though. And it's kind of there, but not in a beat you over the head with it kind of way. I've never made a big stink about it because in a lot of ways it's an interest of mine, but I don't want to appropriate another culture because I'm in America. And, I mean, I have these Northern European roots and stuff but I wasn't raised with those things. And so I don't really feel the need to make a big stink about it and, dress up in Viking garb and, become a musical LARPer. But those things, like I said, a lot of the lyrics often reflect my interests and reflect what I'm really excited about and what I find a lot of meaning in. And Grimness Small, and that specific story from the Edda really kind of applied with some of my views about greed and kind of lust for money and lust for wealth. My views, my political views, and my economic views. And I felt like that kind of a cool way to kind of talk about how I feel about capitalism and how I feel about, our economic system here in America, but without beating people over the head with rhetoric. Instead, I used this story. So, and it was fun too. It was a fun song to make, for a 24-year-old. Probably not what I would do today.
Well, actually, that comment's perfect because we did note that you absolutely do still have references to Scandinavian, Norwegian lore, etc. The new album has a song called Nothiz, which is a rune, but we did notice that you don't seem to have songs anymore that specifically retell myths or that reference myths directly in the title. Is there a reason you kind of decided to move away from retelling stories, even if they thematically fit an album, as you've kind of progressed in your career?
Well, the song that you're referencing is Cedar Skeletons, which it uses runes as a metaphor. It talks about Nalthis and the Isa, and it references them both. And the lyric talks about drought and then also about the harshness of winter in Minnesota when everything kind of freezes. And so I use those runes kind of in tandem against each other. But no, I mean, I didn't really feel the need to continue on, using folklore in my lyrics because so many other people and done it better than I ever could. So it didn't make a lot of sense for me to just continue on rehashing these things that other people have said and said better than I can and more authentically than I can. So I just kind of moved on and continued on down my more personal path.
Well, another thing that you mentioned that's also a kind of clear change across time is that, it's quite noticeable that in your earliest releases, there seems to be more willingness to write quite straightforward and clear political messages. So your self-titled states that the concept of capitalism robs us of our very nature. And on the subject of morality, you state that one nation's ethnocentric perception of God cannot be the only end. And on Kentucky, you rhyme, I'm a coal miner's son. I'm sure I wish you well. Let's sink this capitalist system in the darkest pits of hell. So given that, metal has this history of lyrics which are arguably often intentionally vague or obscure, particularly when it comes to their kind of political affiliation, was it difficult, especially when you started to, state these opinions really directly in these early releases?
Well, first of all, the one from Kentucky, that was Sarah Ogan Gunning. And I just changed the gender to reflect the singer. She says, I'm a coal miner's wife. And I didn't feel comfortable singing with my
fair enough,
really gravelly somebody's wife. I thought that would be a little odd. And so and it was serendipitous that Sarah Ogan Gunning's song very much suited my agenda. You know, just much like the Lay of Grimnir suited my agenda. As for the song off the self-titled album, I wrote those lyrics when I was 19. So, you know, they're definitely a bit more bold and flowery and lack nuance than I would right now. You know, because that song I had written that song before I even started doing Panopticon.
Okay.
It was pulled out of a journal that I wrote when I was 19 years old. So, and then repurposed, and then I added some more lyrics to it after that. So I was either 19 or 20, quite young when I wrote that. But yeah, I kind of felt like lyrically, you know, my mom used to always tell me that you can catch a lot more flies with sugar than you can with vinegar. And I felt like a lot of my lyrics were a little bit too preachy and kind of bashing people over the head with my ideology. And I kind of felt like that was unnecessary. You know, I think that people were a lot more willing to understand you if you come at them, you know, a little bit more gentle and a little bit more poetically, or a little bit more vulnerably. Instead of coming at them like ready for a fight, if you come at them ready to talk and to say how you feel and what you think, but in a way that is not like automatically causing people to come up and protective of themselves. So that's why as I got older, my lyrics became less confrontational and more conversational. You know, less about provocation and more about being thought-provoking, you know, not to put too fine a point on it, I guess.
Was there any influence early on from, you said you had a pretty big background in punk at the time? Because that's certainly a genre which does like the kind of vinegar style provocational, here's my opinion, deal with it kind of messaging.
Oh, 100%. I mean, back then I was, you know, dreadlocks down to my ass, Amoebix t-shirt on every day, you know, like typical crusty punk, you know, absolutely 100%. That was very, very, very punk. And I mean, the posters for that record had like the Circle A and Circle E on them. And like, I mean, it was super crusty, you know, early 20s, you know. There was actually, embarrassingly enough, there were some corpse paint pictures from those days.
Oh, really? Oh, go ahead and Google that.
Yeah.
See if we can find them.
It's pretty rough. That's one of those things that I'm like, because oh god, that's one of those things that I always feel a little cringy about, because I've only had to wear corpse paint a few times in my life when I've done like session work for people, and like I look so goofy in it. You know, I look goofy anyways, so I look goofy without corpse paint, but it's tenfold worse with the corpse paint on.
Well, of course, like with a career at the length of yours, it's likely that you're going to experience that cringe a lot more than some of our other artists that have only been around for like 5 years or something like that, you know? So you're in a tough spot in that sense. Yeah.
Too busy to cringe in 5 years, but after 10 or 20, I think it's, you know.
Yeah.
Like I'm not going to dig out the stuff I wrote during my bachelor's degree and
absolutely not
read that or try to get it published.
Well, and that's the thing, is that like I've gotten to be buddies with some of these guys that like, you know, they're doing bands now, and I'm like in love with their band, and I listen to them, and they're like, dude, yeah, you know, I listened to you when I was in high school, and I'm like, oh god, you know. I mean, my fiddle player Charlie, who just joined, you know, his first record to do with me was And Again Into the Light. He listened to Panopticon when he was on the school bus in 8th grade.
Oh my god.
You know, and I'm just like, oh, that's so unfortunate, you know. Like it just makes me feel like, you know, a little it makes me realize that I am aging a bit, but so it goes, you know. I guess it's better than not aging, because I'm dead.
True. Yeah
very true.
That's very true. Yeah. So actually, you kind of in this discussion, you've answered one of the questions you're going to ask, which is that, you know, why have you kind of made your lyrics a bit less direct? But I guess to combine that with that whole process, with the fact that we're working in metal, is there any kind of irony? Because you still do have. Sorry, I should just start again, because even in your current lyrics, there definitely are political messages that are there, but there's a bit more metaphor and kind of framing around them, as you said. Is there kind of an irony, though, in general, to having political and personal messages in a genre that is, involves screams and growls that are often unintelligible to trained ears? Like when you write, is there any effort or necessity in balancing a message that you may want listeners to hear against the fact that oftentimes, even if you're a huge metal fan, you can't actually hear what's being said?
So there's a good friend of mine that plays in a band that I really love, and it's a band that I've really looked up to for many, many years. And he was visiting in Minnesota, and we were sitting in the sauna, and I was fortunate enough to get to hear their new record, or a working version of their new record. And this is a band that I kind of waited. I wait with bated breath to hear their music, and seeing them live is one of those things. It's just something. I mean, I finally have gotten to see them once, and it was like I cried because it was so moving. And we're sitting in the sauna and we're listening to the record in silence, just really paying attention to the album. And obviously I can't understand the lyrics at all. It's just screaming, like vicious screaming. And the images that I could see in my mind from the sound, at the end of the album, I told him what I saw in my head. And there is no way, there's not a fart's chance in hell that I understood these lyrics. It's impossible. And he's like, dude, that's what song number 2 is about. You just described a scene from the song. He was like, you literally just described everything that I was saying in the song. And I was like, wow, that's powerful, because when you can convey your feelings and your emotions, case in point, and again, into the light, nobody knows what the lyrics are about. Everybody's gotten it right. I mean, so many people have written me their stories about the album, and they're right. Like everything they're saying is the shit that I was dealing with and the shit that I was facing in myself. And sometimes you don't have to spell it out for people. Sometimes music is the language. And I think that that's really important to remember about metal, is that the things that we're trying to convey, we convey with sound. It's not just lyrical. The music itself is lyrical. It's, the music is the language that we speak. Think about all the bands that we all listen to that are from Scandinavia and from, Germany. Like, how many languages are we all fluent in? Like, but we know the general message of what's going on here because we can feel it. You know what I mean? Like, I love Nechochwen, and their most recent album blows my mind. I cannot understand a word of Hungarian, but holy shit, if I would guarantee you, I know what's going on because you can feel it in the music. It resonates inside and it stirs deep within you. And I think that's really, that's really unique in a lot of ways to metal. It's because metal can be this like volatile, explosive thing, or it can be this triumphant thing. This music that stirs our emotions and it's, I guess, that's all I'm trying to say, really.
That actually aligns interesting with some of the stuff, because we've been doing some research on like bands in Asia that are into metal and how they kind of combat their languages, especially using non-English. And I was talking to a singer for a kind of battle metal style band in Japan. And he's, a lot of Japanese people don't speak that much English, but they tend to have a knowledge of a lot of random words because they had education and just contact and whatever. And he was saying very similar, like when he listens to these battle metal songs, he doesn't know the full lyrics, but his exact quote was something like, I hear words like mountain, fight, dragon. It's like, okay, I get the idea of what's going on with the song. I can kind of vibe with that feeling of going to battle, and that's why I like the music so much, is he could always get this image of a story just through a few words that would kind of give him the motivation or the fighting feel of the song.
Well, and it's interesting, in those regards, like thinking about bands that are not writing in their mother tongue, but also like being fans of music that, we love the music so much, but the bands are not writing in a language that we can understand. And I remember once once I started learning Norwegian, and I, went over and lived over there for a little while, for a few months, and then I came back and like continued to learn the language because I had friends over there and stuff, and I'm not like, a great Norwegian speaker or anything, but I can do well enough to get by and have some conversations with people, like, simple conversations. I can write some, and, if I'm drunk enough, I get a lot more confident in speaking Norwegian, and then I can really, the inhibition away, you know what I mean? And, but one of the things that I noticed was that once I learn quite a bit of Norwegian and get to the point where I could speak conversationally, I went back and I read a lot of the lyrics to a lot of the Norwegian bands that I had really loved, albums I really adored, that I'm not going to name any of. And I really wish that I hadn't read those lyrics, because a lot of them are just dumb, and I was like, damn, I wish I didn't know that, because in my mind I was imagining that the lyrics were so epic, and instead I'm like, this is really, goofy, Yeah. So that's part of the magic of it, is that, sometimes you can really be off, like, you can understand what they're saying, or what you think, what you put into it, what you're reading into the music. It reflects how you feel sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess it doesn't always work the way that I was explaining, it's kind of a bag.
Yeah, sometimes you connect to a song and find out it's exactly what they're saying, and sometimes you connect to a song and you find out it was actually something silly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess it's a crapshoot.
Yeah, a little
absolutely.
bit.
Well, seeing as you've mentioned, and we've just been speaking about non-English languages, it seems logical then to talk about some of this non-English language use in your lyrics, because, I think we've mentioned, a bit about Norwegian, and we mentioned Swedish earlier, but I found it kind of interesting that some of the most explicit messages that are still in your lyrics typically appear in non-English languages. So one example is from Cedar Skeletons that we mentioned earlier, where you have the line, "Our pathetic existence adds too much weight. What was once sacred now has no truths. Our fleeting residence causing permanent damage. Earth's heart is bleeding out. Only skeletons remain," which we believe is in Spanish. So is this the influence? It's in
Spanish, but I did not write that.
Yeah, well, that's what we were going to ask about. It's like, so why did you decide to like bring in these other, writers or other contributors to create content in non-English languages within the lyrics?
Was there any, also just to hop on that, was there any back and forth, or did you just let them put what they wanted to say into the song?
So Vic Sanchez did that, and he was in this band called Wither and Rot. It's like a California neo-crust band. He and I have been friends for quite some time. He's a really good guy, and I enjoy our friendship. And the last couple records, whenever I'm working on something, I kind of send it to him, and I'm like, "What do you think? Do you like this? Is what could go better?" And he was visiting last year when I was working on the record. I mean, it takes me forever to make an album, in spite of what seems like a rapid fire output of music, always working on something. And so like, I'll put an album out, but I've already got one almost finished by the time that the album finally does come out, and another comes out another year and a half later, because I'm still picking it apart and dissecting it. And that record, it was right around the time that And Again Into the Light had come out, when he was visiting, and I wanted him to do some guest vocals on it, because he hadn't been in a band in a while, and he really enjoys doing vocals. And I was like, and he's Latin, and then he speaks Spanish and English both, like equally fluently. And I was like, dude, like, the song deals with this climate crisis issue, because the album is this kind of like dual concept record about two things at once, right? The album is about aging and coming to terms with aging, but it's also about climate crisis, and that's the language that I use to describe aging and getting used to the fact that I'm, my youth is behind me, is rapidly becoming behind me, right? And kind of coming to terms with like, okay, I'm entering this next phase of my life, which is my middle-aged years. And, I'm accepting that these other parts of who I've been are gone. But that, nobody wants to make an album about, hey, I bought a Ferrari and, had a midlife crisis mobile.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not very poetic. Like, so I chose instead to explain these doubts and deal with these thoughts that I'm kind of recognizing that I'm entering this new phase of my life, by talking about climate crisis as well, because I felt like there was an intense parallel between the two things.
Mm-hmm.
And him living in California also is experiencing the effects of climate crisis, not in the same way that we are here in Minnesota, until last year when we had massive wildfires in northern Minnesota, right by my cabin, which the fire started across the fucking street and it burned 40 square miles and somehow did not burn my cabin down. I mean, what a stroke of luck.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And if that had burned down, we wouldn't have been able to move here because we had to sell the cabin and the house to get here in Ely. So, I mean, that would have really screwed everything up. And so I was like, dude, write about the wildfires, and he wrote about it in Spanish because it felt right to do it, in something that pertained to him very much. And so, and I think that people like bringing their own, there's also lyrics on that album that are in Norwegian that my friend Patrick Ness wrote. I feel like it's really powerful to use a different language sometimes, because it can add a different inflection and a different sound to the music, and it can draw distinction between voices and vocalists. I mean, I even noticed when I switch languages, my voice doesn't sound the same.
Yeah.
Hell, I noticed that when I'm talking to Southern people, I have a heavier Southern accent, and when I'm talking to Minnesotans, like that goes away.
Yeah.
So it's knowing your audience and also using it as an artistic tool.
What about
and to also be fair, the song that's in Swedish was originally written in Norwegian, but the singer who sang that is a Swede, and so he translated it into Swedish. And then he also used some, he's from Lapland, and he used some colloquial phrasing, regional colloquial phrasing or whatever, to indicate his culture and where he's from. And so that's why that song is in that specific dialect, Swedish dialect as well.
Did you ask him to do that, or was that kind of his little twist?
That was his twist. Because originally the song was written in Norwegian, and he was like, I'm going to change this to Swedish. And it's close enough. Swedish and Norwegian are close enough to where, there's a lot of cognates. So it was fine, I can read it and understand it, and it's fine. But then he wanted to change some of my phrasing to be indicative of where he is from. And I was perfectly fine with that. I actually liked it better because it reflected the vocalist who was performing. It reflected his culture and his identity.
So speaking of like these languages more broadly, there are a lot of lyrics that you've written as well that draw on kind of Scandinavian, words and languages. Broadly speaking, when you include words from other cultures, from non-English languages, what's kind of your goal here? Does using non-English terminology create a particular effect in your mind?
Sometimes it's just because of the way the word feels and sounds to me. Sometimes it's also just kind of mixes things up and creates a different feeling and creates some oddness. And I like that. If I said everything, like really bluntly, that would be fine too. But sometimes I like to make to make the reader work for it a little bit, and to think about it, and to think about the implications and the cultural implication of what I'm saying. And especially when I use runes, when I talk about runes in my lyrics, the runes can be interpreted in many different ways. And so that creates some like flexibility in the meaning in the song, if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're wondering as well, like, is your choice of like language to include in the lyrics just based on your own familiarity with these languages, or is there any sense of, some quality of those languages being particularly suitable to, a genre like metal? Because of course, we do see a lot of Scandinavian languages very well represented in a lot of metal lyrics.
It's sometimes it's pertaining to the subject matter. For example, I can't speak a word of Italian, but the La Passione di Sacco et Vanzetti from the split with Like a Blood is entirely in Italian. I do not speak Italian at all, as you just heard. I'm sure I butchered the hell out of that, but I wanted to song in Italian because Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti were Italian immigrants in America. And I felt like if I did the song in Italian, that it was in a way very appropriate for their story as Italian immigrants in America, and in a way paying homage to them and their suffering and everything that they went through, being unjustly convicted and murdered by the United States government.
They were convicted. They were accused of being anarchists, right? Is that the group, the pair I'm thinking of?
They were accused of crimes of treason and terrorism.
Right.
And it's hard to commit treason when you're not allowed citizenship.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's incredible books about them and documentaries about their story. I mean, we could talk about it all night, and it's a really powerful story, what happened to them. But at the same time, like, I felt like the story was, I wrote a big thing about it in the liner notes of the release. But I really felt like it was powerful emotionally and aesthetically to do the song in their mother tongue. And so I did. And it was hard as hell because I was like having to figure out, as I'm tracking us, figure out how to pronounce these words as close as I could. And I'm sure I, screwed it up pretty bad, but, thus far, nobody's really complained. But I'm sure they will now.
I mean, with the screaming and stuff, it makes the accent kind of go away in any language. But how did you even go about like writing in a language you don't necessarily speak?
I wrote the lyrics in English, and then I was in communication with an Italian fan.
Okay.
And he was so kind to translate the lyrics for me, and he edited them to make them more poetic, and he kind of walked me through. This was back in the MySpace days.
Oh, wow.
When we had MySpace, and that's how I got in touch with him, was via MySpace, because I've never been like a social media guy. I'm actually pretty reclusive. So I don't have any social media at all. My band has a Facebook page that my label runs. I have zero access to it. So Marty always teases me, and he says he's going to use all kinds of flowery, goofy language when making posts so that people will think it's me. So he taunts me with that. But yeah, so that's how it worked, and he was really kind to do that for me. And there's that.
I mean, you mentioned the liner notes. When you write in non-English languages, do you hope that fans will kind of access what you're going for? Like on the new album, you have a song called Hjemløs, which is homelessness in Danish. Like when you imagine
Hjemløs in Norwegian, it's Norwegian.
Oh, is it?
It means homeless.
Oh, okay. Google lied to me. It said it was a Danish word. Maybe I imagine quite similar.
Well, it's very similar.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is embarrassing. Egg on my face here. You have a Norwegian word. It means homelessness. And
homeless.
Like homeless. Sorry. Oh, so it's homeless.
Yeah, hjemløs.
Okay. So, but when you imagine your listener, getting the album and looking at the track listing and seeing that for the first time, do you hope that I guess hopefully not Google it because they'll get it wrong like I did, but do you hope that they'll investigate this? Do you think that the use of words that readers might not know conveys something to them that, you hope that they get out of it?
Well, my choice to use Scandinavian language on the new album is because there's a lot of the new album that touches on a very important issue in Minnesota, which is the early, not early, but the first generation Americans in Minnesota that immigrated from Sweden and Norway, and that generation they're kind of dying off. And it's the Scandinavian American phenomenon. There's tons of them. I mean, everybody here's last name is Son, ends with Son or Gren or, Kvist or whatever. So many of these Scandinavian names. I mean, my wife's family too, we're Håkansons. And, that's so much of a part of our, with me being an adopted Minnesotan after living here for 10 years, this is so much culture here. And it's made me very sad to see that older generation of Scandinavian American people dying off because they're reaching the end of their lives. Mm-hmm. And then when COVID came through and ripped through here, so many of them got sick and died. And even like the Norwegian church, Nechochwen in the Twin Cities stopped holding services. And this is like one of the things that those old Scandinavian American folks, this is what they lived for. There was so much of the culture that is based around the elderly here. Every year, Hammerheart would do this event in Fargo Moorhead area at a homecoming, and there's an old Stava church there in a Viking ship that's been rebuilt and historically accurate stuff. And there would be, this Scandinavian American festival with all these vendors, and it was mostly old folks that were there. There was even this, I remember, there was this old Finnish lady who would play these beautiful love songs on the accordion, and they would just make me cry because it was so full of sorrow and beauty. And then there was just this deep poetry to the whole area, the sentimentality of these people's culture and where they came from, and what they carried on from their parents who immigrated to America, and their immigrant experience. And so the first song, the instrumental one, is kind of it uses a hardanger fiddle, and it's a very like mournful Scandinavian instrument. And I felt the need to have some little like nods of the hat to those folks by using some of those language choices. It was more for me than anyone else.
Okay. So, like, what do you mean for you? The story you mentioned, it's about kind of these older people, right? But the story is for you.
No, it was more like those language choices was more for me to like put in there. It was like my way of acknowledging this thing that's really important to me and that I think is really beautiful, and my way of kind of mourning the loss of that aspect of Minnesotan culture.
Okay.
I mean,
I didn't.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Please go ahead.
Well, what I'm saying is that by saying it was more for me, I didn't expect anyone else to understand my intent.
Okay.
Right. So in saying that then, are you hoping to represent more of that cultural aspect of Minnesota's history? And is that something that you're hoping like listeners can, if not, investigate individual words, then at least investigate like the connection between, that culture and the Minnesota context?
I'm not like trying to like proselytize like the Scandinavian American gospel and like get everybody to like eat lefse and lingonberry jam and meatballs. I'm not like trying to, what I mean? I'm not trying to be like, now go have some more hot dish. It's not what I'm doing here. Like I was more or less just kind of observing it and feeling a little bit of grief about seeing this thing that I think is really beautiful kind of go away. And it's just the way it is. in this modern world where we have other things that we're interested in, we can't expect like, the Zennial crowd to like mow down a whole bunch of lutefisk at Christmas time. Life goes on. This is the life cycle. This is the way it is. Each generation defines themselves. And in a way, like, I just kind of feel a little bit of sadness about seeing some of these traditions go away with the grandparents. Right. And we've had, our family had some deaths a couple of years ago. Some of our loved ones that passed away, our elders that passed away. And so I just kind of wanted to tip my hat towards them and recognize what is being lost. And by no fault of anybody, it's just, people age, and what goes with them is the wealth of wisdom and experience and culture that they carried with them through their lives. And then that's gone when they go, unless we write it down, unless we, document those things. So yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking about. And that informed my language choices.
Is it difficult at all to write these kind of personal and heartfelt messages in a second language? Because when we speak English or write in English, we can go back and say, okay, I know all these words. This one's maybe not the best here. I can choose this one. But obviously, when writing in a second language, there's often times where we don't know as many synonyms, or maybe we fall back on phrases that we know work because we're worried about making an error. When you're writing in a non-English language, do you ever find yourself kind of shackled by these kinds of limitations, or do you have ways of getting around them? Do you have the ability to choose the exact word, or do you kind of sometimes have to go, okay, this might not be perfect, but it is the best that I can do, and I'm okay with that?
Absolutely. I definitely, like I said to you in an email, like I speak Norwegian about like a 10-year-old. and it's not great. I mean, I'm significant. I'm not a particularly articulate guy anyways, but I'm significantly less so in a second language that I am not super fluent in. But at the same time, when I choose to explore that creativity by writing in a second language, which kind of breaks me out of some of my kind of conventions that I kind of fall into, like these ruts that I just kind of plummet into. And like, it's like always writing a song in A minor. You start off in A minor, and then all of a sudden someone gives you a capo and you're like, shit, I can play A minor all the way up here. You know what I mean? And that was what like writing in another language helped me do. It helped me to find new lyrical devices and to get out of some of those old ruts. And then if I don't know the word that I need, it gives me an opportunity to learn a new word. Okay. And that works out really awesome, because I'm like, I didn't know what the word for that was. Now I do, because I used it in the song. So yeah, it's always a learning process.
Yeah. So speaking now more of your English medium lyrics, we did notice that you tend to use a lot of monosyllabic or bisyllabic words throughout, a lot of the English medium lyrics, as I said. So for instance, the line, as the heart beats fast and the fear sets in, all is still beneath the winter sun, as Northeast is carved into flesh and bone. What exists in the soul speaks when alone. From Cedar Skeletons, that has 38 words, and 27 of which, that's about 71%, are just one syllable long. And to take another example, No Hope from your last album has 236 words, and 189, so 80%, are just one syllable long. Do those stats surprise you, or have you kind of consciously designed your lyrics to be, more, monosyllabic, bisyllabic, more kind of straightforward in their style?
Well, as I've said previously, and I'm not like a particularly articulate dude. I'm not using a bunch of $100 words. That's not the way that I talk, anyways. Unless I'm really angry and I'm really pissed off, all of a sudden stuff that I had no idea I knew comes out. And I always joke that I wish that I could like be creative and write when I'm super pissed off, because then my lyrics would be better. But no, I think what it is I just have a tendency to write my lyrics without judging it too much.
Mm-hmm.
And also I want to be understood.
Right.
You know, a great example of this is one of my favorite songwriters is Chris Knight. Chris Knight is from Western Kentucky. He's from Slaughters, and he is a fantastic songwriter. I've got a lot of his records, a live bootleg of him. And this dude writes these like phenomenal songs. I mean, songs that I've learned and played at shows. Like there's a song that he wrote called Rural Route that I've played at gigs. And there's a song called Out of This Hole that I've played at shows. It's on my Live in Belgium record. But the beauty of Chris Knight is, I mean, he's obviously a really intelligent dude, but he writes in a language his language is so simple, that is so easily understood, but it's profound ideas, profound thoughts, deep, you know, emotional things, you know, dealing with really dark things sometimes, dealing with really personal things, but he doesn't do it in a way that's only for the highly educated. He does it for people, normal working class dudes, you know, dudes like me that live out in the woods and, you know, can't speak this like kind of highbrow language. And I love him for that. I adore that he can convey these really powerful messages, but with very simple language that almost anyone can understand. You know, and I feel kind of similarly about Townes Van Zandt and these kind of, and Guy Clark, Steve Earle, these kind of writers that convey very profound messages with very simple language. I like that. And so I guess it's natural that if I like something, I'm just going to do it myself, you know, because like, you know, I'm not going to try to impress anybody with my vocabulary because it's not going to impress them. So I might as well just use the tools that I have at my disposal to say what I want to say.
There are sometimes, though, that you do use some like larger words. So, for instance, on the upcoming album, you had words like celluloid and lugubrious that like we had to kind of look up. And there's lines like suffering banality for an irreconcilable end, or memory dissipation, like the hoarfrost delicate cling, the supplemental envelopment of winter's prosthetic embrace. These are certainly quite heavy in terms of like syllables and even words that maybe, you know, people might have to look up to encounter. Are lines and words like this strategic? What kind of purpose do they have in your writing, especially kind of given what you've just said about a desire to, you know, be accessible, generally speaking? You know, is there a right amount of difficulty that you aim for?
I must have been pissed off when I wrote it. Only thing that I can think of. I must have been mad about something. I must have stepped on a Lego or stuff my toe, you know. That's the only thing that I could think of. I mean, because it's, you know, I don't really talk like that. You know, and I seldom write like that. You know, in fact, I think I remember when I wrote those lyrics. I had just come back from a brew day. It was winter, and I was brewing at work, and I'd had a really rough day. And I got home and I went and sat in the sauna. And I had my phone when I was sitting in the sauna. My sauna at the time was like in the woods behind our house. It was like a little wood-fired sauna. And I was sitting in there and I was like super pissed because I'd had a really shitty day at work. And I was writing. And so there you have it. I was mad.
There you go.
So
do these big words feel like, why do you think they feel angry, or why do you think they come out when you're angry?
I have no idea.
No idea. Does the song
no
feel angrier when you perform it? Like when you perform a song that has big words in it, does it feel different to you? Like after the fact? Because obviously, you know, the emotion that spawned the lyrics might not be there. You might have to be like recalled live. You might have had a great day before you go on like a show, right?
Right. And it's really strange. I think about that a lot because so many of my lyrics are really personal. And you know, when we played our first ever live show, you know, and I have like a live band because on the records, I don't know if y'all know, but on the records it's just me.
Yeah.
Except for guest vocalists and my string section. My string guys is my friend Patrick in Germany and Charlie in Texas, out in Texas. But you know, I worried that when we played that record in its entirety on the subject of mortality from start to finish, as well as some other songs, because you know, obviously that album's not long enough for our debut show. I was really worried that I wouldn't be able to get through it. That I would, you know, because it's so personal. You know, I wrote so much of that record after coping with my dad's passing. You know, with my old man's passing. And you know, kind of coming to terms with his death and facing the mirror that it held up to me about mortality, which was, you know, up until his death, it was not really something that, you know, I really thought of being such a young man at the time. You know, I wasn't really keen to think about dying. And all of a sudden death became incredibly real to me, which was really, really hard. And I missed him and I missed that innocence that I had before. And I was really super worried that I would fall apart or I would get too emotional and I would fuck up and make mistakes, you know, all that kind of thing. But it ended up being okay. It was perfectly fine. And so, yeah, I guess I can kind of compartmentalize those things in a live setting. I'm somehow able to kind of turn it off weirdly. And then a lot of the time I'm super focused on just the enjoyment of being with my bandmates, my live band, who are just some of the most wonderful people. And also the enjoyment of so many of the people that come to our shows. I mean, I've been so fortunate to become friends with so many of the people in our audience and see some of the same faces every single time we play. And it's such a joy to get to see them and to hang out with them before and after the show. And, you know, a lot of those folks I've ended up becoming like actual friends with, and, you know, we visit each other. I mean, that's how I met Vic, you know, and Vic came and did vocals on a record and is, you know, comes to visit me every year. I met him because he was at one of my shows. So that's just how it goes, you know? So yeah, I'm able to turn that off. But as you know, as far as do they feel angrier? I guess yes.
Okay.
They feel more determined.
Right.
You know, and they feel colder. They don't feel so folky and they don't feel so accessible. And sometimes anger can be something that's very like, you know, unrelenting and driven and also not considering of consequence. You know, so it's just like, you know, pummeling, like harshness, and sometimes using that kind of language can convey that determination, I guess.
Right. There's a very nice parallel there with what we're seeing, kind of the use of like the bigger words, particularly in your earlier albums when you were younger and perhaps like experiencing more of those like emotions, right? And
full of piss and vinegar, you mean?
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like they're all kind of, yeah, you can see this like coalescence of all these factors. That's very interesting.
Shed a couple of layers here. It's getting warm in here. It has been really super cold here. Winter does not want to end.
Oh yeah.
In northern Minnesota, it's crazy. We've had
you should be getting warm now, right?
Well, at some point here, I mean,
yeah.
we should be having some melt off, and we're currently not. It's just a ton of snow. It just doesn't feel like it's ever going to end.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, always living in Australia and stuff, I always reckon it'd be amazing to live somewhere where there's like snow like that. I reckon it'd be really magical. But I have heard from people like yourself that it can be quite an inconvenience, much more than it is like some kind of like wonderful winter wilderness that I probably imagine it to be.
It is really beautiful. I mean, I've certainly done my fair share of writing about snowfall.
Yeah.
Snowbird and branches is like a prime example. And there's a line in Snowbird and Branches that's about how like God, where is it? I can't even remember my own damn lyrics. It's pathetic. I've got them here somewhere. Here we go. Come on, open up you. Desolate are these nights, stay close to the fire's warmth till the sun again burns bright at the arrival of dawn. The forest painted blue in the absence of vitriol, burned out and forgotten momentarily the artificial glow. Snowfall whites out my mind, my fingers fall numb, possessed by snowbird and branches, thankful winter has come. Let concrete have its poison, let buildings rot and fall, give me the north woods and give me the mountains or give me nothing at all. So what I'm getting at here is like there's this line about the forest painted blue in the absence of vitriol refers to the blue hour, which is what's happening right now. Let's see if you can see it. Do you see how everything is blue?
Oh yes.
Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
When the sun goes down right at dusk and everything is covered in snow, it turns everything blue. And it's the craziest thing.
Yeah.
And it's like, especially if the moon comes out, it makes it even more blue, And so like, there's a certain peace about that. In that line, the forest painted blue in the absence of vitriol, burned out and forgotten momentarily the artificial glow, is getting away from screens, getting away from modernity, getting away from the controls of modern society and how everything's this invasive, everywhere you look, there's something monitoring us or there's something demanding our attention, Facebook or Instagram or Messenger, or a little dinging phone or your TV, advertisements, whatever. And there's something peaceful about winter because it just slows everything down and it covers everything in snow. And then at night, as the sun goes down, everything turns this calming, cool blue, And then here we have the Northern Lights, and that's like the craziest shit you've ever seen in your life. Seeing this guy with this green fire just like everywhere, it's bonkers. I've only seen it about 18 times, but every time I see it, I'm like, holy.
Only 18 times?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but I know a lot of people that have lived here a lot longer and they've seen it so many times that it doesn't blow their mind anymore. They're just kind of like, oh, Northern Lights. So yeah, that's what I'm talking about. When you say, snow is like, oh yeah, I could see it being majestic. It is.
Okay, I'm glad I'm not like just fantasizing about something totally unrealistic.
Especially when you leave the city. Like in the city, it gets kind of like it gets covered in gunk and car junk and whatever. You get that kind of brown sludge on the side of the streets. But then you move outside where there's less cars and just white and the trees covered in it. Yeah, it's beautiful.
You're 100% right. Like when you're in Twin Cities, it's pretty grody.
Yeah. St. Paul midwinter was pretty gross. Yeah. It was beautiful in the morning, and then cars drove over it and sprayed, gray mud and sludge all over everything, and it's awful. But you go out a little bit distance out there, and just.
Did you go up to the North Shore and stuff when you were here?
Not a whole lot, but I spent like an Thanksgiving at my buddy's house in Black Duck. And they're like, his parents have a cabin that literally, if it rains too much, like they just can't get into town, like that level of, kind of isolation. Like really, rode up a mountain and not paved. So, a little bit too much rain, can't drive. And so we spent
a mountain. I'm not familiar with where Black Duck is, but the only mountains that are up here are like Mount Josephine and Eagle Mountain.
Oh, not a literal mountain, but like a hill, an uphill slant. Like you have to drive up?
Well, Mount Josephine and Eagle Mountain are pretty big, and so that's what I'm wondering if that's where you were.
I don't. I wish I could.
Lake Superior.
I don't know how close we're Lake Superior. Like we basically only spent time at the cabin. Then we go down to town to buy like breakfast food and stuff sometimes, and then come back up. But like, it was just trees all around, like a frozen lake. They had a little sauna too, and just you wake up and just pure white in every direction.
That's the awesome thing about northern Minnesota is that like, with northern Minnesota, it's like everybody up here's got a sauna.
Yeah.
But you learn really quickly why.
Yeah.
Because when you're out shoveling snow, like I made a pathway around our house. I spent like 6 hours shoveling snow one day because it was just so bad that we had gotten such a dumping that you just couldn't get anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I finished it. And I mean, literally, it was like a meter deep everywhere. And so I like dug out my fire pit and we had an outdoor sauna that we brought up from our old house. We just took our old one and brought it up here. But the house that we bought has one in the basement already.
Mm-hmm.
And we're lazy, so we use that one because it's electric. But the outdoor one, it was really cool and it's wood fired and all that shit. And I was like, oh, I don't want to let it go. So we loaded it on a trailer and brought it up here. So I dug it out with the good intentions of I'm totally going to use this. No, I didn't. The winter was just too brutal. I kept using the indoor one. And I dug out all around the house, dug out everywhere. And by the end of it, it was just like, I couldn't feel my feet. Like I was painfully aware of my tips of my fingers, and that's why people have that. I mean, it's just winters are brutal. I mean, especially up here. I mean, the town next to us, Embarrass, Minnesota, holds the record for coldest place in the lower 48 states. Coldest actual temperature, and then Tower holds the record for coldest average temperature.
I'm not surprised. Like I grew up in Utah, which has a lot of snow, and like I lived in Nagano in Japan, which also held the Winter Olympics, which had snow. But there's no place I've ever been in my life that had the cold that Minnesota had. Like I remember being just bundled up in shirt and sweater and jacket and then bigger jacket on top of that, and still walking down the street having like a wind gust come on off something coming down off of the Great Lakes, cutting just right through everything I'm wearing, like getting stabbed with a knife. Just cold.
Well, in Utah, it's got high desert, doesn't it?
Yeah. So we have a very dry cold.
Crazy.
Yeah.
I had never seen high desert a couple of years ago. It blew my mind. It's so intensely beautiful.
Oh yeah.
Those colors and the vegetation, and I mean, we were driving through. I wasn't in Utah. I've been to Utah once, and I've been to New Mexico, but we were playing that festival, Fire in the Mountains, which is in Wyoming. Okay, which is great. Y'all should totally go to it because it's unbelievable.
It's a bit of a flight, but
we landed in Salt Lake City, and we had to drive all the way over to Wyoming for that. And we drove through all this high desert, going through Salt Lake City and then crossing over into northern Idaho.
Yeah.
And it was the whole time we were listening to like Western, like that kind of stuff.
Sure.
And it was so amazing. And I'd never seen that environment before. It really blew my mind. I looked like a tourist, like taking all these photos, like, oh my God, All right, anyway, we better get back to work.
All right,
yeah,
absolutely. So, let's see. I think should we just start with the round question? Is that a good place to jump in?
Yeah, absolutely. But I just had like a little question. I just kind of off the dome, if you don't mind. So as we've been talking about your English lyrics, I noticed that you've often compared them to how you talk, saying either that, the lyrics that you've written in the past either do or don't represent like how you speak, which I think is a really interesting comparison to make because we've kind of had an ongoing conversation over the course of this podcast as to whether or not lyrics should represent the way in which you speak. Should it be conversational English or should it be this kind of either elevated form of English or, you know, form of language that's not in any way representative of everyday talk. Like, is that something conscious for you? Like, do you want to kind of avoid, you know, even if we kind of remove this from the discussion of accessibility that we talked about earlier, like, do you want lyrics that represent how you yourself would just have a conversation?
Well, it's going back to the Chris Knight thing. Like, I want to be understood when I want to be understood. You know what I mean? But when I don't want to be understood, it's just, it's just for me. It's just my personal self-expression, that me just screaming it out into the ether, just kind of getting it out there and saying what I got to say, get it off my chest and hope nobody notices. But yeah, I mean, I think this like kind of plain spoken language, it's been more of a recent phenomenon. Well, I guess it really hasn't. The lyrics on the subject of mortality are pretty plain spoken. And that's an older album. I guess it really just depends on how I'm feeling. And sometimes, the language choices have to fit the emotion. And it can be like a profound thing that's said really simply, right?
Yeah, totally.
And I don't want to dress up simple concepts, like with big words. I don't want it to be a makeup on a pig.
But it's just interesting because like one of the things that some of the musicians we've spoken to who do try and like differentiate their lyrical styles from their conversational English is that doing so means that the lyrics are going to be taken more seriously, or they're going to be looked at more in line with like poetry or literature, versus if they were to write then in conversational English, like it would just seem too everyday. But that doesn't seem to be a concern for you, right?
I guess I never really think about what other people are going to think about me, other than the fact that, like, if something's too personal, maybe I don't want them to know what I'm saying and what's on my mind, because I feel like it's too exposing. But I'm not like worried about being taken seriously, because I recognize that I'm a total goofball, and if they knew me, they wouldn't take me seriously anyways. But it's just one of those things. I guess it doesn't cross my mind, because I'm kind of, I guess in a way, a lot of artists and musicians and poets are kind of self-absorbed, right? Because we expressing ourselves and how we feel about the world, and we get kind of lost in that. And so maybe it just doesn't cross my mind, because in the moment I'm too busy just barfing up my heart. And that's, I guess it just doesn't cross my mind. Like, are people going to see this as poetry, or should I put on a verbal tuxedo and, take it more seriously? Instead, I'm usually just kind of like, this is what I think, this is how I feel. And the language fits my emotion. Like, the language fits what I'm dealing with,
Was this true even when you were younger? Like, have you ever felt the pressure to like make your lyrics metal, quote unquote?
No. I mean, because I was really kind of more of a punk. Still kind of am. Also, when I was younger, I really struggled with mental illness really hard, really badly. And that's been that's informed a lot of what I do. A lot of the music that I make kind of deals with some of those things, and deals with being a person living with severe mental illness. It's been something it's not something that I've really talked about a lot, because it's not particularly anyone's business. But it's definitely been, Panopticon has been the way that I've dealt with that stuff. And so when I was younger, I hadn't really gotten a grasp on myself at that time. I was still pretty fucked up. And I think my lyrics reflected that. I think my lyrics reflected somebody who was kind of a little unstable. And as I've gotten older and more stable and more comfortable with myself and more comfortable with my emotions, I'm kind of able to express them in a less chaotic way. So yeah, maybe that had something to do with it, or maybe it also just had something to do with being young.
Yeah.
Being young and hungry, and I don't know. Honestly, I don't know.
No,
I mean, I'm just kind of like thinking about it. Like, I'm like, well, I mean, a lot of these things you guys are asking are things I've never really thought about before.
Well, it's kind of our goal.
That's our brand.
Yeah, our brand. Try to bring up some topics that sometimes it's just chance, but sometimes they lead to reflections that we find interesting. Because actually, like on the topic of youth to now, we have noted a few features that we'd say are kind of consistent in your lyrics, and that they come up, repeatedly throughout your career as a author and writer and poet, musician. And one very simple one is that you definitely kind of used rhyme throughout your career. Back in 2008, you had the pair "Locked Away, Yet I Possess the Key. I Am the Master of My Own Slavery." Patient from 2011 Social Disservices has "I awake behind window bars in a room so white, cold like melting frost in the summer's night." From Scars of Man, you have the song "The Moss Beneath the Snow," which repeats, "There may only be a few, perhaps we'll never know, but the answer will haunt us, so ask the moss beneath the snow." And on the new album, you have even a longer rhyme series in "Nothing Cold Can Stay," "In the World of Rotten Decay," "The End Time's Underway," "Nothing Cold Can Stay." Why do you think rhyme is a technique you've used throughout your career, and what effect does it bring? Why do you think it's been a kind of consistent element of your writing? Not every song, obviously, but something that you come back to as a technique.
I don't know. I mean,
okay.
It's sometimes it just feels right, and sometimes you stumble upon a rhyme scheme that works. And sometimes when I write, I just kind of write free form, almost as if I'm speaking, because that's just what comes out. And writing, okay, let's be honest, there is something tremendously satisfying about a rhyme scheme, right? When you're writing something and it just keeps on rhyming and you keep on coming up with ideas, it kind of feels like, it feels like little victories that you're making.
Yeah.
Solve the little puzzle.
Yeah, it's like you keep finding the right piece to the jigsaw puzzle, and you just you're on a winning streak. And I feel like rhyming can be like that. But eventually you run out of words that fit the rhyme scheme, and so you have to find another device to find your way to the next thing. But then sometimes it just happens. It just comes out that way, and that's enjoyable. That's pleasurable, I think. But it's never something that I do. It's never something that I do that I'm willing to like sacrifice the meaning of what I'm saying to fit the rhyme scheme.
Okay.
I'm never like, oh shit, this word doesn't rhyme, but I should use this word so I can keep it going. I'll abandon the rhyme scheme just like randomly and just go off, it's like, look, something shiny, and then I just go get it, And so it's never the top priority to stay with a rhyme scheme for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And how about the use of repetition then? Because we touched on it with the line "Nothing cold can stay," but you have a lot of songs that repeat a line throughout, your career so far. So, be it 4 uses of, "Which side are you on," which you mentioned earlier, is from written by another writer on the track with the same name, and "No Hope" from "And Again Into the Light." Is particularly interesting, repeating "She has yet to try," "Forever refusing to be held down," and "When we all chase the grain," the latter of which appearing to reference back to the song "Chase the Grain" from 2014's Roads to the North. So, yeah, what makes a line feel like it can or should be repeated for you?
A lot of the time it's position in the song. If there's a part that the music is really powerful and you need something that's more like an anthem, something that's more like you want to convey some emotion, so you repeat a line again and again to emphasize the importance of the line, but also the power of its delivery. So it's like, if I want this to sound really emotional and really powerful, I'll say the line again, And to be honest with you, if I am to be honest with you, there's definitely been times where I've been like, fuck, I don't got enough lyrics for this stream. And I know that like that's lame, and I try to avoid those kinds of things. But most of the time when I have a line that I repeat again, it's because I'm trying to convey some emotional intensity.
Well, those are usually the lines that stick in people's minds as well, right? Like, when you hear it like several times, that kind of, ends up being kind of the hallmark of that song in a sense, right?
What is it they say, that if you want to convince yourself of something, you're supposed to repeat it like 7 times? Commit it to memory or whatever. And I'm sure that there's some psychology to that I totally don't understand. However, for me, it's mostly just, and okay, so a lot of the time, so this is weird. A lot of the time when I'm recording, I like to keep the first take.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Because
that's unusual. Yeah.
The first take is the most sincere. It's the most gut wrenching. It's the most, especially because what I do is this emotional purge, right? So I'm like, I always joke and say that the reason that I do Panopticon is because I don't want you to read about me in the news.
Okay.
And, crazed, drunk Kentucky man, does XYZ, whatever. I don't want that to be the case. So it's this emotional purge where I put all these intense feelings and intense observations that I have about the world. And so a lot of the time I find when I'm tracking, the first time that I do a song is the most sincere. It's the most charged. It's the most, it conveys the way that I really feel. Because I'm not being like, oh man, my voice cracked right there. It doesn't sound very brutal. I better go back and do it again. That seems a little, I get it. Like, I want the record to sound good. Sure. Everybody wants the record to sound good. But I also recognize that sometimes the flaws and imperfections in a record is what conveys how you really feel. And I'm aware of that by the music that I like. The musicians that I love so much, I listen to their records and their live records and stuff, and they aren't perfect, but I enjoy the feeling that they show and the feeling that their performance gives. And so sometimes when it comes down to it and it's time to do something, and I haven't like really sussed it out, all the way, I'll repeat the line again because I just don't have another line. But then I'll listen back to it and I'll say, you know what? I actually like that. It gives some power and some vigor to the music. So I'll keep it, but I mean, then again, it's just me in this room, this studio by myself. So nobody knows, I could do
until now. There's kind of a mythos to that first track, like first take kind of thing, isn't there? Because I remember like the one that sticks out is Bauhaus's Bela Lugosi's Dead. That apparently was like a first take, and it's always given the song like a bit of a ooh, this is the first. They got this in one take. Ooh, kind of mythos to the track.
Sure, I mean it's there. I totally think that there's an element of like intense emotional sincerity that you get when it's a first take, because like. But once what happens, is it worth keeping? If it's really fucked up and it doesn't sound right and everything's a total wreck, are you going to be like, no, that's the one? You know what I mean? Like, so there comes a point where you have to pitch it and say, okay, we're gonna do this again. But yeah, I at least like to keep some of it. If I don't keep the whole vocal take, I'll go back in and punch in the lines that are goofed up. But I like to keep some of it because that keeps some of that original energy and emotion, present in the song.
Another kind of, sorry, go ahead, Jess.
No, you go. It's all right.
I know. Another kind of thing that we've noted a little bit throughout your career is that there's a kind of an occasional use of swearing. There's no real swears on the album that's coming out. But, there's been lines like Out of Tune Lullabies, To a World Gone to Shit. The Swedish track that was mentioned even has the word shit in Swedish. So I guess just broadly, obviously, you're not using a lot of swearing, but you do use it occasionally. What kind of makes you decide, okay, I'm going to put a shit here or a fuck here, but I'm not going to use them more broadly? Like when do you know when to put a word like that into your songs?
I don't really swear a lot in my lyrics, intentionally. I swear a lot when I speak, and I'm aware of that. When I was growing up, it was one of those things in my household that swearing was not okay. But on the other hand, like my mom, who's like the most amazing person, I'm crazy about my mom. I think she's a great human. She swears and then like tells me not to. And now I swear a lot, and I apologize to my mom when I swear in front of her, but it doesn't stop me from doing it. And but I remember when we did the live in Belgium thing, like it was in this old church in Belgium, and my mom was like, "Don't you swear in that church, okay?" And I, of course I did, just so it was beyond, just so it was recorded, and I said, "Sorry, mom,"
Yeah.
And so it's just something that I don't do a lot, in fact, the live album, the live migration, we edited all the in-between song banter out because I swore a whole lot. A lot.
Yeah.
Like anytime I spoke, there was a fuck in there or a shit in there. And so we edited all that out. Also, there was a lot of like crowd banter of the audience, like cracking jokes, and me and Andy laughing our asses off. And it made the record too long because we were just laughing. Panopticon shows are glorified basement shows. So it's, very, very little separation between the audience and us. We're all friends. And that's one of the reasons I love it so much. It's because it's just a big room full of friends. But yeah, so on the records, I avoid it. I mean, every now and then I use a swear word, but it's just when it fits.
Like you mentioned earlier. Sorry.
I was just saying, sometimes it just fits, and you can't resist it.
You mentioned earlier, though, like that you want to kind of have your music reflect the way that you talk, but you said you swear more than when you talk than when you sing. Like, why is it that kind of this write lyrics that sound like who I am, the swearing doesn't go into that kind of process? What is it about the words that means that they're...
A lot of the time it's just because I don't want to disappoint my mom. just to put it, I mean, my mom, what if my mom finds one of my albums and there's all kinds of fucks and shits on it? I mean, even this interview, my mom's gonna hear that and she's gonna be like, "Austin, why do you swear so much?"
We're not swearing, we're talking about the words. Yeah. We have to say the words to discuss them.
Yes, yeah,
it's contextual. It's contextual.
She's gonna be like, "I heard what you said."
We'll cut out the bit when you say she swears like that.
Yeah, they just rat me out.
And the whole church bit, we'll get it out and be like, I was very clean during the church.
She knows. She's heard. And also my cousin John, like, her to show my mom everything. So, so it's all out in the open. But yeah, no, there's a lot of there's a lot of that pressure, like, just being cognizant of the fact that, like, I do have people that are listening that perhaps that's not necessary. Do I really need to use vulgarity? Like, it'd be super vulgar in my lyrics. If I don't need to, then I won't.
Right.
But like I say, sometimes it just fits.
Well, when it does fit, like, when you do decide to use a swear word, do you find that, like, the inclusion of that vulgarity, as you say, adds something that, clean lyrics alone wouldn't carry? Like, a lot of research in linguistics, for instance, has indicated that swearing can play a really important role in expressing emotions, or, of course, receiving emotional states or interpreting emotional states as well. Like, is that kind of what it is for you?
I mean, yeah. Yeah, sure. I mean, sometimes, like I say, if it fits, then if I'm trying to say something that I feel powerfully about, that I feel strongly about, I think there's actually some swearing in Chase the Grain, isn't there?
I think
there's. I'm not sure we didn't write down the exact songs, but there's a few. Like, there's scattered swear words, but
I think a lot. Chase the Grain has a fuck in it, and then there's another song off Roads to the North that has a fuck in it. and then obviously Autumn Eternal has quite a few. That last line, out of tune lullabies, the world gone to shit. I don't know. I felt like it was appropriate because some people had complained that the penny whistles on Kentucky weren't perfectly in tune because they're made out of tin. They're a penny's worth of tin. It's not like you can really get it perfectly in tune, and people are like, "Oh my god, it's out of tune." And there was some criticism about that, and I was like, "Come on, you know what a penny whistle is? It's not like a high-tech instrument. It's not going to be perfectly in C standard. With my guitar, it's not going to be just right. And so that line was kind of a snarky retaliation. Out of tune lullabies to world gone to shit was me kind of accepting the fact that my music is imperfect and I am an imperfect person, extremely imperfect, and my music is also imperfect and the world is imperfect. I actually like that line a whole lot.
Good line.
Yeah.
I thought it would be cool to have on the sleeve of a t-shirt, but then I was like, I don't want people wearing that. You sell that at the merch table. My mom saw your new t-shirt.
So yeah, moving out more broadly, you have a number of songs that take the first person perspective, many which describe a scene and many which move between these two frames. So how do you decide if you're going to insert yourself into a song, assuming that the I in these cases does refer to you?
Well, a lot of the time the I doesn't refer to me.
Oh, interesting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I write in character sometimes.
Even though the songs you say are very personal?
Well, I write in character, but the character that I'm writing about may reflect something that I think, but I am not writing. It really doesn't make any sense. But if you think about the Scars of Man, the Once the Name was Wilderness, so many of those songs are written from a character's perspective. But the character is the narrator. The narrator is telling you something that me as the writer thinks or feels, but through the guise of narration of a character, fictional events, these kinds of things, Yeah. So sometimes the I is totally me, but it's not really me. It's like, some imaginary person that's conveying my message.
Okay.
So that kind of anonymity gives me some wiggle room. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that surprises us a little bit given how again personal the lyrics are, but it makes it's anyone who writes a novel that has a character that expresses their own opinions, it's the same thing, right? They have a character, a protagonist.
Exactly the same thing. That's a much more articulate way to put it. that makes a lot more sense than what I just said.
Oh, it's the same thing. No.
Same thing, yeah.
Yeah, exactly the same thing. Okay. Well, what about in terms of broad themes? Because obviously a part of it is likely where you live and what you engage with day to day. You say you go out into nature to write, but obviously on all your albums, these themes of frost and rime and snow, ice, nature, winter keep coming up again and again. Is this just a product of being in nature and being in winter, or does winter have a kind of thematic meaning to you, or does it even just feel metal in a way? There's obviously lots of black metal in frost, Immortal on a frosty mountain, that kind of stuff.
I mean, we all like Immortal here. Let's just admit that.
Yeah, of course.
Get that out of the way. We can all accept the fact that we enjoy Immortal.
Yeah.
And but no, it's just, winter is such a huge part of Minnesotan culture. The first snowfall here in Ely happened in October. And I've seen snow in September before in the 10 years that I've lived in Minnesota. And it snowed today. It's been snowing since I've been inside this room talking to y'all.
Yeah.
I looked out the window earlier and it started up again. And I was like, damn it. So it's just, winter is just such a huge part of our lives here in Minnesota. But it is inspiring too, you can't see snow and not feel some connection to it, or it's beautiful. but it's also scary. I think about like that song Echoes in the Snow. My wife hates that song. Absolutely hates it. And she doesn't like me playing it. She doesn't want to listen to it. And the reason that she hates it is not because of the song, the sound. It's because of it's because of the way that that it expresses life in Minnesota, the dangers of something simple, like coming home from work. Something as simple as driving to the grocery store, and then a storm hits, and then before you know it, you're in the ditch, and then you're in the ditch, and then now you have to worry about getting safe and finding shelter so that you don't get too cold or get frostbite or whatever. These are all like very real things that happen in Minnesota, and the character in that song sees a roadside accident up the road, and he can't stop in time because he slips, and then he nails into the people in front of him and he dies. And the last line of the song is, about the dawn she'll get the call, they'll bury me come the thaw. Nights of December when the winter wind blows, screeches and scream echo in the snow. And that is something that has kept Beck up at night when I've been working late in the brewery, and she's like, why isn't he home yet? Did he get in a wreck? Because it's snowing or whatever. So, I mean, there's a certain element of the culture that's just, it permeates, winter permeates Minnesotan culture. It's just a part of our daily lives and who we are, and so, I can't help but write about it. If I didn't write about it, it would be disingenuous. If I wrote songs about deserts and palm trees and shit, that would be like ridiculous, because doesn't reflect the world that I live in at all.
If you did live in that world, though, do you think you would? Like, is it possible to write like a black metal song about, a 100-degree nice day on a beach?
I mean, what about that? Didn't that dude, that Sacred Sun dude with the sunglasses, he did that shit, didn't he?
I'm not sure. I'm just not familiar.
I mean, I didn't check out his lyrics, but it's the picture of him on the cover looks like a photo. He has like sunglasses and he's all in the sun. Anyway,
we're gonna have to check this out.
Yeah. I mean, when I lived in Kentucky, I mean, I wrote about life in Kentucky. My friend Tanner refers to what I do as a regionalist metal.
Okay.
Because I write about the environment that I'm in and the inspiration that I see outside, and the land that I tread. Everything that's around me is what I write about. And so I guess, if I lived in Arizona, that would inform my writing. If I lived in Florida, that would inform my writing. I mean, given the situation that I have been in the past and in now, I don't see any reason why it would be any different. But however, I guess it doesn't sound very brutal or grim or frostbitten to write about palm trees. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess. Yeah. At first glance. Yeah.
A desert might work, but palm trees seem a little hard. I'm not saying it can't be done. I'd like to hear the challenge, but
grim coconuts.
Yeah.
So
there's gotta be something metal and something dark about spending all your days. I mean, as a kind of pale redhead, I certainly find the sun to be terrifying.
Ginger torture.
Yeah, exactly.
Christ, you got to edit that out. No, I get what you're saying. I mean, it does seem opportune that I have the chance to sincerely write about winter and darkness. It's not like a shtick because it's here.
Right.
Yeah.
So I get that. I get how that could seem all too convenient. But it is the reality of anybody who, lives here. I mean, it informs, but I don't write about it as a negative. I don't write about winter as a negative. I celebrate it. And I think that that's a lot of people that live here, that live in Minnesota, do celebrate it. You know, everybody gets out and they go skiing and snowshoeing and they go ice fishing, and like you get into it and it becomes like a huge part of the culture. It's people love it. People celebrate winter here. You know, and I do. I mean, granted, after 7 months of it, you're kind of ready for it to be over. But yeah. Yeah.
Well, so you've been very, very kind enough to show us some of your lyrics before this interview. But while, you know, not printing lyrics is a decision that's far from rare in the metal scene, you're actually the first person we've interviewed who has decided to not publish some of the lyrics. You mentioned the upcoming album will be, but the last few kind of have not been. And I guess that said, you have published lyrics in the past. So how do you decide if you'll publish your lyrics or not? Are there songs you want fans to know the lyrics to and potentially engage with and talk to you about at shows and et cetera? Or are there songs that when, like, you finish an album and say, oh no, this is a bit too personal, I want it to kind of be a mystery?
You know, it really depends. It really depends on the subject matter. And there are some, because ultimately I make records because I need to process. I make records, as I joked earlier, so you don't read about me in the news. I make records because I need to process my own thoughts and feelings. Some of those thoughts and feelings are things I choose not to share with other people. And then the question is, well, you know, then why put them out in the first place, right? Well, I mean, it really doesn't make a difference because, as we've talked about earlier, it's not like you can understand what I'm saying anyways. Because I'm screaming my guts out and it's covered in reverb. So you're not going to know what the hell I'm saying. And so there's also some sort of satisfaction in knowing that you just screamed out into the void, what you think and what you feel. And there's a sense of satisfaction that you have in knowing that you've gotten it off your chest. It's out in the world and it's just echoing through the world. That's definitely something that I think about and has crossed my mind pretty regularly. And a lot of the time I'll have the intention of putting the lyrics out, but then I totally chicken out at the last minute because I'm like, oh, that's too personal. I don't want people knowing how I really feel, you know? And it's also different. Like when someone asks me, when we talk, you know, and I'll kind of talk to them, you know, I'll meet somebody at a show and they'll say, what was this song about? And I can always find some way to kind of delicately skate around and make my explanation just broad and general enough to where I can get the basic idea without exposing too much of my own personal drama. It's like a lot of the Death lyrics that were obviously directed at other people. And now we all know the stories of who Chuck was talking about. I don't want that to be the case. If I have a song that's about a certain experience that I had, or an interaction I had with somebody, or something that bothered me that happened in my life, I don't want that to follow the record forever. And I also will I'll speak in general enough terms to where when I sing those lyrics again, I'm not having to relive that experience. And so, I want the song to be broad enough to be about many things and be relatable to multiple people. And sometimes when that's not the case and the lyrics are too specific, I choose not to publish them.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a short answer done very longly, or done very, you know what I'm trying to say. Cut that out.
No. That was a great answer.
It's a long answer to a very, simple explanation. I could have made it a little bit more concise, I guess. But
all right.
Well, speaking to two academics who always speak at length a lot longer than is needed to convey a single idea, so you're fine.
Yeah,
just regularly. I gotta circle the airport a couple times before I land.
Yeah.
No, I think no exaggeration. Jess regularly yells at me for writing sentences that go on too long and could be one or three short sentences. It's something that we all suffer from.
Yeah, facts.
Well, and I have the problem with where sometimes I have to kind of process something out verbally before it makes any damn sense. So I kind of have to splatter it all against the wall before it looks like a picture.
Yeah.
And that is totally what I just did just now. I just was like, oh, there it is. It's a landscape.
No, it's totally sympathize. Yeah. Write 300,000 words, cut it down to 100,000 for a book. Less, you gotta. The ideas come out as you use the language, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. But it's a weird thing. I mean, it's like I totally see the irony in like making this, super emotional and thought out music, and then being like, yoink, take the lyrics and the meaning away, and being like, yeah, sorry, I totally get that, and I have wrestled with that. I joke and I tell my wife that whenever I croak, when I kick the bucket, she can put all my lyrics out there because I won't have to deal with it then.
Yeah. But as you said though, right? Like, sorry, you go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, like, as you said though, like people can still like kind of read into like the music, even if they can't understand the lyrics, and kind of interpret the potential meaning behind it, even if that doesn't match the author's intent, right?
But isn't that kind of nice though?
Yeah, I reckon.
Because then you can kind of see yourself in the music that you're listening to, and it gives you a chance to kind of relate to it in whatever way you choose. And I think that's kind of nice. Going back to the story about the guy who had the pet die, and he was very sad. And then he writes me and he's like, the song that I relate to, and I'm like, buddy, I'm sorry, it's about punk rock. What a bummer. Like that's a total bummer.
But it's still about loss though, right?
Yeah, so for him,
it's still that like thematic connection.
But that loss that I was experiencing seems very trivial in the face of an actual death of an animal or a loved one, or something that was really an actual living being that was really important to you. And then here I am like lamenting my teenage punk rock years.
But still the loss of something important, right?
I see that. Sure, totally. But I also see that like it's when you have like a concrete, explanation for a song, like this is what this is about. It doesn't give you the chance to read into the song what you see in yourself. And I do think that there's some value in that.
I think this links kind of to our last question quite well, which is just, if you were to sum everything up, what do you feel is the role of language and lyrics in Panopticon's music, and more broadly in the metal as a genre?
I mean, that's a really loaded question. But at the same time,
it's a tough question to end on.
Yeah, it's pretty tough. I think that language is like a vehicle to express yourself in the music, and some people use their lyric writing as a way to further enhance the thematic elements of their music. Like think about like Nile. Nile's lyrics are all this like Egyptian folklore, and then sometimes it's in different languages, and the language change adds this kind of exoticness, and makes it gives it a character and a flavor to it that it wouldn't have had if it was in English. Or you think about all these bands, like these black metal bands that'll have parts in Latin because the Latin sounds so much more evil, it sounds so much more haunting and scary than if they had just said the same thing in English or, whatever language they choose. So I think that the language can be used as a vehicle to express yourself and express your perspective or evoke a certain emotion, a certain mindset. But ultimately it's another tool that you use, just like a guitar or or drums or like in my case, like, a banjo or mandolin, resonator or accordion, whatever other, of the litany of instruments that I use on my records, I'm trying to convey something, and I'm using a musical instrument to do that. And sometimes I'm conveying something by my use of language, or I'm conveying an emotion by the way that I scream a word, or if it's whispered, or, like imagine Agaloc's The Mantle if all the vocals were screamed like suicidal, depressive black metal, like the vocals that sound like an elephant blowing its horn, like, imagine if all of John's vocals on The Mantle were done like silencer, how different that record would be. And I think lyric writing and language it's the exact same. I don't think that it's any different at all from any other instrument. It can be unimportant, or it can be extremely important.
Brilliant.
Yeah, lovely.
Well, yeah, thank you for being with us and spending all this time talking through your lyrics. We really appreciate the detail you've given in your responses.
Sorry if I've rambled too much.
No, it's been perfect. Yeah, super fascinating.
Yeah.
Before we finish up, though, we did want to ask where the best place is for listeners to find Panopticon's music, and any news about tours and things like that might be coming up.
Check your local used section.
And it's going to be hard to link in the description.
Bandcamp is good.
No, Bandcamp, iTunes, for digital. For records, you can go to bindroomrecordings.com. I have a Panopticon merch store that me and Becca, my wife, we run. Also, Season of Mist is our distributor in Europe. But they don't typically take a lot of copies of the records, so you might be out of luck there. And then as far as shows go, that stuff gets posted on Bandcamp and on Binary Recordings. There's always since I don't have social media that I run, it's kind of hard for me to update anything. So yeah, but we will be touring this autumn in Europe with Grift from Sweden, and I'm really excited about them. I think that would be an amazing episode for you guys if you guys talk to Eric from Grift.
Okay.
Yeah. Could you get us in touch by chance?
Absolutely. He is highly intelligent and has some very interesting lyrical influences. But yeah, we'll be touring this autumn with Grift in Norway and Sweden, Denmark, Germany, and Austria. It's our first time to be back in Scandinavia since I guess maybe 2017 or something like that. Okay. It's been quite some time since we've been over there, so we're excited for that. We've got a couple of American shows this year, and then 2023 we've got some pretty big plans for that as well. More international gigs, but we're try our best to finally go back to Kentucky and play in Louisville. We were supposed to play in Louisville right before the pandemic started, and that got canceled because of the pandemic. So that'll be really fun to go back and play there finally after all these years.
Is there a release date for the new material?
The new album is getting closer and closer to being done. The new record has a ton of layers and elements that have not been present on other albums. I mean, there's like huge string orchestrations on it, massive string orchestrations, huge choirs, like 26 part choirs with multiple voices layered over and over and over again. Ironically, there is a choir that's in Latin. So,
cool.
And that was intentionally done to make it sound more sinister.
Okay.
So that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
And so there's the record it's quite long. that all Panopticon records are. And it's really layered, it's really huge and cinematic, and every time I put a record out, I'm always convinced that everyone's going to hate it. So we'll see what's going to happen with this, because it definitely is a little different than the other ones have been, but it's more metal. It's a lot more metal. It's more of a black metal record than Anakin Into the Light was, which had a lot of death metal and doom influence. So this is more of a black metal record, and there's a lot of like super melodic and atmospheric parts, but there's a lot of really epic, huge arrangements. It's taken, I mean, I started tracking it in 2020.
Oh, wow.
It's been a slow process, this one. So
awesome. Can't wait to hear it.
Yeah, look forward to it.
Yeah, hopefully you'll like it. If you don't, I'm sorry.
Fair enough. Yeah, I'm sure we will. Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been amazing. We really appreciate it. It's
really enjoyable.
Just, two random people send you an email and you agree to chat. That's great. Thank you so much. Thank you for all your help.
I always appreciate it when people do that.
Yeah.
Well, Aaron spoke really highly of y'all.
Oh, it's good to hear. We really enjoyed chatting with him.
He's a really special person, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's our longest interview. He was
so generous with us. Yeah. Thank you for listening to Lingua Brutalica. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you stay tuned for our next episode. Before we leave, we just wanted to acknowledge that this podcast is recorded on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging.